hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimonish Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimonish Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimonish Uta Vardanya Shri Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimonish Sane Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimonish Uta Vardanya Shri Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi hum Om Guru Vajra Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimonish Sane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimonish Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimonish Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi hum Dagi Jetsun Lama Tuje Che Nyamda Dala Tuje Siksu So Gebe Shesan Dala Tendo So Oyon Sunge Nawa Tsedo So Tsechi Ningne Solwa Debe Tse Dechen Korlo Visu Lekshune Yela Sambe Dede Malupa Gemel Hungi Drupra Chingi Lo Tsoni Sodan Diktun Shakpe Tse Dunge Namke Yinsu Lekshune Lapchen Tsoni Yonsu Zopada Chera Nyetun Chamra Chingi Lo Chanchu Pargi Nyinsen Tuk Nyu Peme Siudru Lekshune Chanchu Drube Gegen Kunshi Shi Tungen De La Drupra Chingi Lo Dagi Lona Chola Chokpadan Chemin Samchurang Emba Shiwadan Chodan Tumpe Dudu Malupa Beme Lungi Drupra Chingilo Dorna Tingne Tseraba Tamchedan Techi Pardu Nekav Tamchetu Rese Kyamne Lama Kelem Tukje Chingi Dala Siksu So Gongyab Drewe Nyamda Dachala Jetsun Lame Tuje Rab Gongne Kudan Sungi Nawa Dralmet Nyamsu Nyongwe Kesan Topra Sho Kewa Kuntu Yandal Drame Cheki Pela Longche Chin Sada Lamge Yönten Rabzon Dorje Change Kopa Nyurtop Sho Pakyuke Kudan Dagi Lu Pakyuke Sungdan Dagi Nga Pakyuke Tukdan Dagi Yi Ten Yerme Chiktu Chingi alo makyuke kudan dagi lu makyuke sundan dagi nga ten yerme chiktu chingi alo Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Svoha Om Muni shipu ki chu shi me to trama re raba ling shi sangye shin tu mikte ulwa kun namanda shingla parasho yidam guru ratna mindrala kam niryata yami sangye chedan soge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupara sho sangye chedan soge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupar sho sangye chedan tsogi chonam la jancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupar sho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Laye ke da ludane jinke drubundanda mi kenamda drawa kunge dranam chitsampa thamche ketu dagi chutento thamche ketu dagi chutento. Buongiorno.
Good morning.
Ieri
Yesterday,
abbiamo visto
we saw
I 5 fattori mentali
the
onnipresenti.
5 omnipresent mental
Più
factors.
che altro visto il fatto che
Actually, what we
in ogni
saw
momento
was that in
della
every
nostra mente,
moment, our mind
che a sua volta
that
è come un flusso
is like a flow
di
a
un
flow
pensiero
of
che si
like
va
one
collegando con
thought
un
that
altro.
connects to
Però in ogni
another, but in
momento noi
every
abbiamo
moment we
5
have
principali
these 5
aspetti che sono
main
presenti.
aspects that are always present.
C'è il contatto,
There's contact,
che è l'unione
it's this
dell'oggetto,
union of the
del potere
object,
sensoriale
the sense
e
power,
della coscienza
and the sense consciousness. Then we have our feeling. We have the mental factor of feeling through which we experience the object, be it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then inevitably, based on feeling, we have intention, but also discernment, where we attribute a name. We recognize the characteristics of that object, and we say this is that, or this other thing. And then comes our intention, our so-called craving, desire that's at the basis. How can I say it's fundamental? It's this fundamental attraction to happiness and aversion to suffering. So if we have a pleasant feeling, we generate attraction, and if the feeling is suffering, then we generate suffering, and if we don't feel anything, we generate indifference, neutrality, we can say. And that fifth mental factor, called attention, which is present also before, is the characteristic of our mind that allows us to stay on an object once it is perceived. I see something, I hear something, I touch something, I feel something, I taste something, I smell something, or a mental object. As soon as I come into contact with it, there's a part of our mind called attention, which is Ila Cheba, that makes it so that we can stay set on that object. And these are the main mental factors, characteristics of the mind. And then we also looked at the 5 mental factors that reinforce that experience of the perception of the object. The first is very important, which we saw. It's called Dumpa in Tibetan, translated as aspiration. We're on page 22. No, we're on page 23. Aspiration is a very important point. It's where we come into contact with a pleasant. When we come into contact with a pleasant object, we have this spontaneous desire to want that experience to last. But once I have that intention, that attraction to wanting it to continue, I can direct that in many different ways. In other words, what can I do so that that sensation comes back? What can I do to make sure that that feeling of suffering never comes back? And it's here where we project our happiness or our suffering, two sides of the same coin. It's here where we project it into one thing or another. And according to what we desire, we aspire to, what we want, according to that, as a result, come our words, our actions, our choices, the direction that we give to our life. And one point, and I stay reflecting on this when I think about aspiration. Saying that we should have a virtuous aspiration is just not enough. What does aspiration come from? Here we're jumping a couple mental factors here, but how can I desire something? How can I aspire to something? What do I need first? I need to know it. Can we aspire to something that we don't know, something that we're not even able to recognize? It's for that reason that aspiration comes from faith. It's the first of the 11 wholesome mental factors. And my own interpretation of them. faith, for example, and we'll see this further along, faith is described as a virtuous mental factor, but from my point of view, there's also there's a virtuous faith and a non-virtuous faith, because faith is understood as being, the definition of faith is believing in the existence, qualities, and the potential of something. And this is not necessarily something virtuous, but it's not possible to generate aspiration if first we don't know it. And here we see the importance of the information that we receive as we grow up, the experiences that we have, because what we're able to imagine and aspire to, desire, is fruit of the information that we've received, the examples that we've had, etc. Because it's important to believe in what we want. Because if I don't believe that it's possible, I will never want it. I will never desire it. How can I desire something that I don't know? Or how can I aspire to something that I know but I don't think is possible? And this brings to my mind these paintings that we have here in the temple. When we were doing this job to elaborate digitally these drawings, these paintings, it took a couple months. It was a crazy job. One day, towards the end, one friend who was doing this job with me, who had a tremendous amount of experience with advertising, and we had spent the night working. During the day I would sleep for 3 hours and I would work all night, at least 18 hours a day in front of Photoshop. And one day towards the end, this friend came to me and he said, you know, the only reason why we were able to do this job, because we didn't know that it wasn't impossible. Because if we had looked before the mountain of work that was necessary, we would have thought it impossible to finish. But believing that it was possible, we were able to do it. And it's from this, is one thing that Lama Gangchen taught me, among the many, many things, is importance of believing in the impossible. Because when we believe in the impossible, this opens the doors for the impossible to become possible. Otherwise, we stay blocked within what we already are, what we already know. Regarding our own abilities and the state in which we find ourselves, you know, what we want to realize outside it, regarding any context, as long as we're trapped within that little box of what we already know and what we've already experienced, we stay in that space. Instead, when we open up our mind to the possibilities that we don't know exactly how, but it would be wonderful if, and I open my mind up to that possibility, to something that is apparently impossible. And when we direct ourselves towards the impossible, even if we don't get exactly there, we get to other things which normally go beyond what we would have normally gotten to. So what's the function of utopia, for example, as we've said before? I think it's an Argentinian poet that said the function of utopia is similar to the horizon. The further you walk the farther you walk, as you go towards the horizon, goes further away, And so the function of a utopia, the function of the horizon, is to get us to walk. So if we don't have that aspiration to something that goes beyond what we are now, what happens in our lifetime? We do nothing other than try to survive in a comfortable way. We don't have a direction. Life becomes an end in and of itself and no longer a tool for something else.
Not at all.
We can't aspire to something, and we don't need to know it fully, but at least have a mental image of it, at least be able to imagine it. This is what we need to aspire to. So for this reason, what happens is it becomes very important for us to allow ourselves to dream. Aspiration has this aspect of desiring something, dreaming something, aspiring to something. And it's one point that in the days in which we live now, I feel that this is lacking. I have this sensation that we live in times our basic needs are easily met in the context in which we live. Of course, it's not like that everywhere, but in the way that we live, we can say that our basic needs are met. But often what happens is we relax. Relaxing isn't even the right word. Let's say we relax in a comfort zone, in our own comfort zone, and into this comfortable survival where we go from experiencing pleasure, trying to entertain ourselves, resolve problems, but life is just going around itself, and where a higher objective is missing, where I want to go, what I want, etc. And this is fundamental, because if there is no aspiration, there won't be the strength to go beyond, and we will stay turning in circles where we are, turning around ourselves. For there to be aspiration, we need knowledge, we need faith, we need to be able to imagine what is beyond, so that we can put energy into that, because putting effort is a consequence of that. If we see very often in our society, great things were done by dreamers in the good sense of the word. In Brazil, there's a saying that says, to realize something, you need 1% of inspiration and 99% of perspiration. So without that 1%, you know, we'd still be perspiring, but just going round and round ourselves. So that 1%, that direction makes all the difference. It's very important for us to cultivate virtuous aspirations, cultivate virtuous desires, virtuous aspirations. In other words, also ask ourselves, what is it that I want? And in relation also to, more specifically, within the mental factors, etc., when we're in contact with an object, there's feeling that brings intention, and from intention we can stay just in that intention, or we can manifest it by projecting it onto something. And here we see the importance for ourselves to know. For example, when we suffer from something, we try to eliminate that suffering with the means that we have and that we know. If our knowledge expands and we know other ways, other means, and we understand better the causes of that suffering, then we would aspire to different things. I just wanted, before going forward with the other points, I just wanted to recall that we really need to put attention, particular attention in observing our aspiration. Where is it directed? How present is it? What do we want? In other words, asking ourselves what we want, because without aspiration there's no effort, there's no energy that can be put in that direction. And where aspiration is lacking, one stays in this mere reacting instead of actively directing oneself in that way. I don't know if I should open this door or not. How can I say? Very quickly. Sometimes, for example, it's easier to have concrete problems than not have problems at all. Why? When we have problems that we believe that we can resolve, we have something that we can aspire to. We have a direction for our energy, and we have hope. When instead, at a certain point, the problems that we have are already resolved and we don't have anything really specific to resolve, everything's fine, but our inner feeling is still full of dissatisfaction, anxiety, suffering, and sadness. At that point, we don't know what to aspire to. And when we don't know what to aspire to, it's much harder than having a concrete problem, physical problem, material problem that helps us direct our energy. And in our society, our rich society, where concrete problems of survival, I mean, the majority of us, we don't have these kinds of problems. Very often it happens that we find ourselves that the suffering comes from not knowing what to want, to aspire to. And this is tiresome. And here we see the importance, as Buddhist teachings say, we should see how our suffering comes from our mental defilements. So the ideal thing would be to aspire to having more patience, more love, gratitude, concentration, wisdom. Aspire to be able to help those who are around us. Aspire not necessarily to do something, but to be something from inside out. This is fundamental. This also idols, examples to follow. These are also important. All these images around us, they're like idols, not in the sense that we need to idolize, but to say, I want to be like this, not external characteristics, but regarding the inner characteristics that they represent. So sooner, then when we look at faith, we'll come back to this topic. But it's really important for us to ask what we want. Who do I want to be, so that we can cultivate this desire to go forward and see that every day that comes is an opportunity that we can't lose. Because if we don't have an aspiration, every day that goes by is just another day to live. And then at a certain point, life becomes heavy. At a certain point, life becomes tiresome. Why? Because we don't have a direction. We don't have aspiration. Instead, when there's aspiration, there's an important aspiration, we can't lose even a moment. I can't lose these opportunities that I have. There's expiration date here. I can't spend my life with stupid things, worrying about stupid things. And we don't need to produce anything. We need to direct our life to having a more meaningful life. In Tibetan, the term is used to take the essence of life and not just let it go by. And a sign of the lack of aspiration that we all have is seeing the power that the entertainment industry has. Nothing against entertainment, but on one part, it's a way to pass time. But when there is a clear aspiration, a clear objective about what I want, and every moment is an opportunity for that, then I don't want to spend hours and hours to be entertained and let time go by. Nothing against entertainment, but so much, I'd say, am against the lack of aspiration. So it's important for us to look at what aspirations we have, and to see what kind of aspirations we have without realizing it. We have moments of pleasure. We want that pleasure to continue. And often the problem isn't in the lack of aspiration, but simply we aspire to the wrong things. Because if I want a state of balance and peace and satisfaction, but I desire something that cannot sustain that state, at the end of the day, I put a lot of effort into something, and when I get that thing, it's not enough. So it's not important only to have aspiration, but we need to aspire to the right things. Aspire to that which can sustain the state of happiness, balance, satisfaction. So we can divide aspiration into two main categories: aspire external things and aspire inner characteristics. These are the two types of the two main types of aspiration that we can classify. I want wealth, power, money, and my image, or do I want peace, wisdom, awareness, well-being, and balance? I mean, these are two different things. So the aspiration can be of these two types. And something that's important that we said yesterday, aspiration is to be cultivated. It's not something that is there or not. We can train ourselves, we can educate ourselves and gradually induce ourselves to have a certain type of aspiration. As we've said in many other different contexts, it's what advertising does. When a company creates a product and needs to sell that product, what do they do to sell that product? First, they need to get it known, because the objective there is to induce into people desire, aspiration. Because if I don't know, I can't desire it. And if I don't desire it, I'm not going to put my energy into that thing, to getting that thing. It's a mechanism that works very, very well on an artificial level. But to aspire to something, first we need to see that ad again and again, because there's something particular. Our mind works on the basis of connection. I remember always once I felt as if I was being tricked. That was my inner feeling many years ago. I was in Brazil. I don't remember when, but maybe 12, 15 years ago. At a certain point, I see an ad on TV. It was very long. Normally, ads are just a few seconds, but this one, it felt like it was longer than a minute. And they were images, beautiful images of nature. This is hot air balloons over the Amazon and waterfalls and rivers, just marvelous images of nature. And at the end, in the middle of an image of like the Amazon, comes the logo of Shell. When I saw that, I said, "Oh, they're trying to trick me." Because very slyly, what are they doing? They made a connection. I saw beautiful images that really touched me. And I see a logo. The next time I see the logo, I'm going to connect that logo with those images. And when we repeat that again and again, that connection becomes stronger and stronger. So what I mean to say is we can shape aspiration in an artificial way by coming into contact with the object, talking about that thing, repeating to ourselves again and again what we want. And we do this. One way that we do this, prayer is not the right word, but these words of, how can I say, these aspirational verses, Mönlam in Tibetan. Mön means also aspiration, towards the aspiration, as we did at the beginning. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, the means, these tools, may I reach Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. What's the function of this verse? Is to generate aspiration. Generate, to induce in us this aspiration to develop my qualities because I want to help others. And for this reason, I need to practice generosity and patience, etc. It has the function of generating aspiration so that we can then put the energy into it. Aspiration is not something that we're waiting for, that's there or not there. It's something that we can artificially generate. And if we don't do it in a mindful way, then our aspirations will be generated on the basis of others. I've never seen it from this perspective. I had never seen it with this perspective. Maybe about 5 years ago, I'll be brief here. It's a situation, there was a lot of dissatisfaction, even on a public level. But what I remember is that many people were complaining about how things were going. This is in Brazil a few years ago. There were many demonstrations. And what I realized, that everyone was complaining, but nobody was saying what they wanted. So, and when I would ask people, but what is it that you want? Nobody knew how to answer that. And I realized something, and it was just a small shock, because I spoke to a friend who's the owner of a newspaper, and I said, given the situation that we find here, the political social situation, why don't you talk a little bit about the Brazil that is dreaming? What is it that we want as a country? And he said, it's difficult. At the end, he had me meet about 30 different journalists. We met to talk about this, the Brazil that the people dream. And then talking to them was, I mean, what do we know? What do we know? What we don't know what we want. And I realized that most of us, most of us, we don't dream, but our own dreams. We dream other people's dreams. Most of us, in our aspirations, what we want is what is told to us. It's not something that comes from us. There are few who really have this ability to let's use this term, dream, aspire, something that goes beyond this limit, that the limit of today. And these are people who've had enormous influence. Buddha Shakyamuni himself. When we talk about Buddhism and the concept of nirvana, for example, this state of peace where one can be at peace with himself and others independently of where he is and what situation he finds himself in, or doesn't depend on an external context but on an inner state of being, an inner state of peace that doesn't change. This is something beautiful, isn't it? This is a dream. This is an aspiration. It's an objective that's shared with us. So, one important thing is, given that many of us don't dream for ourselves, we need to really be careful about the dreams that we do follow. Because at the end of the day, life goes by and we put energy into what we aspire to. So let's remember to ask ourselves, what do we aspire to? What do we want? It's fundamental. Let's go forward. So this is the mental factor, aspiration, which is very, very important. The next one is called Möpa in Tibetan, page 24. It's translated here as firm apprehension. What is firm apprehension? It is the mental factor that, after having previously ascertained an object, holds on to it firmly. The specific function is to prevent the mind from letting go of the object. Once the object has been ascertained by a valid cognition, it's the mind that says, it's like that, it cannot be different. Möpa is a term used very often in certain practices when we talk about refuge, for example, or certain visualizations, blessing requests. Very often we use this term Möpa. Let's connect it to aspiration. I have a feeling. The example that we gave yesterday, let's give continuity to that. There's someone in front of me who is suffering. I don't, that contact with the appearance of suffering of the other generates within me a feeling of displeasure. I have this intention to get away from that. I see the suffering of the other and I strongly want that person to be free from suffering. This is compassion. To eliminate the suffering of the other, I'm aware that I can't just put my finger in there and change his mind. So aspire to develop my own qualities, to have the wisdom and the ability to actually interact better with that person to help. So I generate the aspiration. May I generate my qualities, become a Buddha, so that I can help this person in front of me better. What's the aspiration? When I get to that aspiration, that mupa, firm apprehension, I'm sure of it. I don't let go of it. Okay, I want to become a Buddha, but maybe something else would be enough, and then I jump to something else. I get to a conclusion of something, and I stay on that thing as if finally I've been able to take something in my hands, and I keep it tight. This is this firm apprehension. One, we need to grasp an object, and then we need also a mental factor to hold on to it. There are times, for example, where we've had experiences, times where we were able to get to valid, correct conclusions, but then after a while, we just let them go. Using the example, if at a certain point we're able to get something in our hands, finally I've got it, and then little by little I lose my attention, and it's no longer there. Mupa is this firm apprehension, this ability. I'm able to get something in my hand, and I'm not going to let it go. I put my intention there to keep it with me. If we see, we've had experiences, particular experiences of gratitude, experiences of affection, experiences of a little while ago, someone came to me and said, Lama, I had to move away from this person because the relationship was causing me more pain than well-being. So of course, it's easier to move away from. It's easier to move away from someone that causes a lot of suffering. It's easier. That's easier than having to move away from someone who also where there's pleasure and pain. So I put my effort into moving away from this person, but after a while, not being in direct contact with that situation that wasn't good for me, well, then I'm missing the good parts of that person. So I lose contact with the reason why I moved away from the person in the first place. And this is where this firm apprehension is lacking. Okay, I know that it's not good for me. I stay in the awareness that it's not good for me, or vice versa. This is good for me, and that's why I'm going in that direction. And even if it's tiresome, if I stay with that idea, it allows me to stay on that path. Is that clear? Somehow, this firm apprehension is something that is to be generated and cultivated. And the way we cultivate it is by remembering the reason for the object. So I generate an aspiration towards something. I'm going in that direction. I'm able to reach that objective, come into contact with that object, and then I repeat the qualities. It's as if it's as if as I'm going towards something, I remind myself of what I already know so that I stay there. Because the danger is I set an objective, I have an aspiration, and as I go along, I can lose my direction, lose the aspiration, mainly because of two things. I'm distracted by something beautiful somewhere else, or because in front of me there's a difficulty that I don't want to face. When that happens, what do we need? We need to go back to the why of our objective. Why do we have that aspiration? Once we've lost our aspiration, we need to regenerate it from the beginning. Mupa, firm apprehension, shows us, it allows us to not lose our aspiration, but to stay into contact with it, especially in front of interferences, of difficulties, and distractions. I want to study something. I want to graduate. I want to have this job. I want to meet this person. I set an objective. At a certain point, there are difficulties. If it's not clear to me that it's important, and I don't hold on to it, hold on to my objective firmly, in front of difficulties, I'm just going to let go. Or if I see something beautiful somewhere else, I'm distracted, my attention goes somewhere else and I drop it. So it's important to stay on it. So this is not just linked to aspiration, but any object of perception. When there's, here the term is used once the object has been ascertained by a valid cognition. It's it's the mental factor that after having previously ascertained, no, it's here under belief. Once the object has been ascertained by a valid cognition, it's the mind that says it's just like that, it cannot be different. So first, there's a perception. I see something, I understand something. Ah, it's like this. But after having understood it, if I don't have this firm apprehension, then I lose it. I think about someone who every once in a while, someone tells me, during teachings, everything seems so clear, and then at the end of teachings, I try to remember, and I'm not able to connect the dots. And this happens with the correct view of reality, for example, other things that, as it's being explained, it seems like everything is clear and it all works, and then after a while, one goes out and tries to recreate that logic, and it doesn't add up anymore. This firm apprehension is actually that. I got to that conclusion. After I've gotten to that conclusion, I keep it, and that allows me to familiarize myself with that object, because valid cognition is that immediate moment of apprehension. I come into contact with something, I perceive it, but after having seen it, after having apprehended it, I need to stay in contact with the object to familiarize myself more. And it's this firm apprehension that makes that possible. So one job to cultivate firm apprehension is, once we're able to understand something, have an experience, develop an aspiration for something that virtuous that we want to continue, let's try to repeat to ourselves the why, the importance of that thing, keep that state, and not take for granted the fact that, oh, I've seen it once and I'm going to stay firmly, I'm going to stay on that conclusion. And I repeat one more time, it's important that sometimes we have experiences that are very, very strong, that give us a certain direction, but at a certain point, we let ourselves be mixed up, involved in other things, and we lose sight of that previous experience. One example, we have a tendency to generalize the object based on the last contact, the last experience that we've had. I can give you two examples, one quite banal and one less. For example, I go to a restaurant. I've been to that restaurant many, many times, and I've always eaten well. So it's a good restaurant. And then I go to a restaurant once, and I eat really badly. I don't like I got a stomach ache. I didn't like the taste of anything. It was a really bad experience. I had been to that restaurant 200 times and it was good, but that last time it was terrible. The next time that I have to choose a restaurant, am I going to go to that restaurant? Probably not. Because how is that restaurant? What's that restaurant like? Is it good or not? Our tendency would be to say, if we were to give the percentage of, 200 times good, one day not good, maybe that one day something wasn't going well. But what do? We have this tendency of generalizing. That last time it didn't go well, so that restaurant isn't good anymore. We shouldn't go there anymore. Similarly, when we're with someone, we could have many, many beautiful experiences with someone. Then at a certain point, we have a negative experience. Maybe that person at a certain point is not well, it reacts badly, differently from before. Something in that specific moment happens. Do we see that specific moment in the whole of everything, or do we generalize? Our tendency is to generalize. What's the danger of generalizing? Is that we lose sight of everything else. I don't know if I have a friendship with someone I can trust, is a friendly person. At a certain point, something happens that this is not good. We have this tendency to lose sight of all of those positive characteristics that we had seen before, and we say, oh, I can't trust this person anymore, etc., etc. In that case, this firm apprehension is, I knew you, I saw your qualities, I know how you are. Let me try to stay on that. Even if there's a specific experience that is different, I remember the previous experiences, and I don't allow myself to generalize. In this specific moment, this happened, but let's remember all the previous apprehensions, perceptions, and when it's really strong, when the firm apprehension is very, very strong, in certain cases it's not good. I've perceived something. I can be attached to this conclusion of how things are, even when things change. I mean, that is still firm apprehension. It's not necessarily something good, but but from a positive point of view, it's something extremely important. So we can see that it's not enough to simply know. We need to also we need to be able to stay in that knowing, because otherwise the mind goes here or go there, and that repeating that process of getting to that conclusion helps us develop this firm apprehension, that conclusion that we got to, that we can hold on to. My experience is that MEPA, firm apprehension, is something that it happens cultivating it, and once it's strong, at that point, it's almost it's something that you can't take away. Instead, when you don't have that, you need very little to change your mind, to change direction. And we've talked about something, you're convinced about it, but when you don't have this firm apprehension, if there's some kind of difficulty, fatigue, a different point of view, and one easily changes direction and is easily taken away from that firm apprehension. Is it connected to morality, is the question. Not necessarily, in the sense that morality has to do with keeping commitments, the commitments to cultivating what's beneficial and abandoning what's negative. It's connected from the point of view that I have an objective, I want to cultivate something, I see that it's virtuous, and I'm able to keep that view, yes. But they're two very different things. So this has to for virtuous and non-virtuous things, but we have more firm apprehension with everything, positive or negative, be it that we know well. So the more I come into contact with an object, with a view, and I repeat it and I repeat it and repeat how important it is, or I familiarize myself with that object, then the stronger I'm able to stay with that view. If I've come into contact with an object in a context, from childhood or in society, where that worldview is stable and strong, and I don't want to change my view because it would bring many other problems. Let me give you an example about that. Connected to firm apprehension in a negative way, there's a dynamic that when we do something that doesn't work, but we have put a tremendous amount of energy into doing that thing, our tendency is to stay in that error instead of accepting that we've made a mistake, because otherwise it feels like we put in all that effort in vain. So we stay in that objective, even if we know that it didn't work, rather than accepting that we've made a mistake. It didn't go well, as if we had put effort for no reason. So it's firm apprehension in a negative under negative light. If we look, firm apprehension also is there when we talk about racism. Many views where one gets to a conclusion, and I say what I'm going to say, and I'm not going to back down. So it can be positive or negative. Let's remember that these mental factors, they increase the power of perception and the grasping of the object. They're not necessarily positive or negative. There are all cases possible, but where there's firm apprehension, the object that we're relating to, that experience is stronger. That's that perception, that context stays with us longer. So we should try to cultivate it with virtuous and positive things, because our tendency is, the more familiarized we are with something, the more we convince ourselves, the stronger the firm apprehension is related to that thing. Just asking if it conditions discernment. Discernment is conditioned by so many factors. Firm apprehension, once one is convinced of something, that conviction also influences discernment, sure.
I don't think there is one precise answer, but let's think about it. La domanda è:
the question is, when you need to when is it better to cultivate firm apprehension, and when is it better just to drop it? There's no precise answer, at least I don't know it. I think that when we have an object that is the fruit of logical reason, direct experience, something that we've understood, and it's an experience that actually corresponds to reality, it's important to cultivate that understanding, and be open to see things differently. When we have an objective, this subjective is based on experience. It's based on a virtuous example, on positive reasoning. It's important to hold on to it, because here we're getting into another point that's connected more to aspiration. What do I want, and how can I hold on to that objective, or should I let go of that objective? I think there are 2 points. The question is that objective virtuous or non-virtuous? Is it beneficial to me in mid and long term? And what's my motivation behind all this? And the third point is it a fantasy or is it possible? These are the things that I think need to be put together. So, is it something virtuous? Good. Okay, there's a reason to hold on to it. So, no, it's not virtuous. It's an illusion of happiness. Better to let go. And the third thing, mid and long term, is it beneficial? Are there the conditions? Is it beneficial? Yes. Do I have the possibility to realize it or not? If the conditions are there, instead we say that, okay, to get to this objective, the negative aspects are greater than the positive ones. So everything, should be seen one for one. But I think in this case, we should look at our experience, our knowledge, our intuition, and it's the union of these 3 things. Attention is where something is much more subtle. There's always attention, regardless of the mental state we're in. I see an object, and it's the part of our mind. It's very spontaneous, primary mind, and that just helps us stay on an object. Firm apprehension goes beyond. It's where one stays, one reinforces, one stays on the characteristics of something, the importance of that thing, something that goes beyond. It's similar to a conviction more than attention on something, which is of the moment. And when you finish perceiving that object, that attention ends. Instead, firm apprehension is something that even once it's finished, it stays on a more subtle level and can be picked. I don't know if it's clear this way. It's not an obsession, no. The difference is attention is for the moment, But once I'm no longer in contact with that object of perception, attention ends. Firm apprehension. Let's say I develop faith in my guru, or I come into contact with a person, or I fall in love with someone, or I have an objective that's important for me. I have experience. I have a direct experience of that, and I stay on that. I don't let it go. This firm apprehension, even when I'm no longer in contact with that object of perception, I'm able to hold on to that firm apprehension without having to do all of that logical reasoning. It's we can say that it's something that is generated on a gross level, but once generated, it stays on a more subtle level to then re-manifest on a gross level as we're attention, no. So firm apprehension, when it's generated well, has its continuity, even if it's not manifested. As we said before, it's not positive or negative. It depends on what it's directed to. I mean, there are many of us who direct firm apprehension on stupid things or on negative things. The racism, for example, is one example, but there can be many other examples. But when we get to a conclusion, not just logical, but when we have an experience of something that is virtuous or positive, seeing what's negative for us, seeing what's beneficial for us, it's important to cultivate that firm apprehension and stay on that, stay holding on to it, because otherwise we'll have to redo that whole process to get to that conclusion. Okay, let's go ahead. The next one, Drempa. This also is very important. Sorry, mindful recollection. Mindful recollection. What is mindful recollection? It is the mental factor that has the aspect of not forgetting the previously ascertained object. It has the function of keeping the mind from being distracted. It has the function of not letting the mind be distracted. It is the basis of concentration. Mindful recollection has three qualities. The quality of the object, being acquainted with the specific object, the quality of appearance, by focusing on the object, does not forget it, and the quality of function, not being distracted. Or rather, mindful recollection in some contexts can also be translated as mindfulness when we talk about meditation, for example, to develop a meditative state, which is the next mental factor that we'll see. There are two antidotes, Drempa and Shershing, which is mindful recollection, and Shershing is vigilance or mindfulness, but it's vigilance. It's our ability to keep our mind of perception. Instead, firm apprehension is about holding on to a conclusion, a conviction, and then that can have more continuity. Instead, mindful recollection is, I see an object. Let's just take any example. When you try to meditate on your breath, for example, what do? We observe the breath and we try to maintain our attention on our breath. So even when the mind starts to go somewhere else, we say, no, I'm observing my breath. There are two mental factors involved. One is mindful recollection, Drempa, and Shershing. And translated in some context, it translated as vigilance, a kind of control, kind of kind of surveillance, vigilance. As I'm observing my breath, this mindful recollection, as I'm watching my breath, here I am, I'm watching my breath, I'm observing my breath. And instead, this kind of vigilance is when I realize, it arises when I realize I'm going somewhere else. Let's give an example. I take the car to go somewhere. I take the car, I want to go to Milan. And every time I give this example, I remember our dear friend Pete, who passed away a few years ago. He, for example, when he would go on a trip, it never lasted the same amount of time. Once I remember, I said, "Oh, he said, "I just got back from Milan." I said, "Did you leave, how long did it take?" He said, "Oh, I left this morning." He said, "Oh," I said, "Was there an accident?" He said, "No, but I just don't like taking the same road twice. And if I see the name of a town that I like to go by that town." And so it would take him a different amount of time every time. I mean, that was from Milan to here. You can imagine when he would take his car and drive to England. So in this case, this example, I'm going from here to Milan. I leave to go to Milan. My mindful recollection is I'm going to Milan, I'm going to Milan, I'm going to Milan. What happens if along the way I forget where I'm going? At a certain point, I see that there's some kind of interference. Maybe there's some kind of interference. There's traffic, and I get off the highway, and I don't remember where I'm going, so it doesn't make a difference if I change my road, if I change my way. Instead, if I have mindful recollection, I stay on the road in spite of any difficulty or interference. Even if I see something more beautiful somewhere else, I stay on my road. So and then there's vigilance. Our vigilance is not just remembering where we're going, this kind of mindfulness, but it's also our ability to see where we're going, because it can happen that I know that I want to go to Milan, but I don't remember where I'm going. So I want to go to Milan, but if I lose this vigilance, then I've taken another road, and I end up in Genoa at the seaside. Oh, I was going to Milan, but there's the fork in the road. That's where it happened. I mean, has it ever happened that you've tried to go from? Has it ever happened at home where you go into a room and then you can't remember why you went into that room? I mean, that's happened to me many times. That's the lack of mindful recollection. Or, for example, we want something, we're doing something, but along the way, we didn't realize that we had actually done something else. In this specific example, this mindful recollection, we are keeping contact with the object without allowing for distraction, without allowing the mind to be distracted by other objects. When we talk about a faraway objective or aspiration, we talk about firm apprehension. Mindful recollection is specific to the present moment, directly linked to that object. It's the basis for meditative concentration. So I go to meditate on impermanence, for example. I observe impermanence. I stay on that. The mind that allows me to stay in contact with that is mindful recollection. It's the basis of concentration. So I'm studying, I'm reading, I'm playing soccer. If I don't have mindful recollection of where the ball is at a certain point, I see something else. Imagine if a soccer player is going towards the goal with the ball, and then at a certain point sees a beautiful girl, and the mind goes somewhere else, or something else. Any other example? What happens? He needs to keep. I remember once I talked about this, not specifically about this, but the importance of the presence in the present moment. I had been invited to talk, I had to give teachings in the museum, the football museum of São Paulo, the soccer museum of São Paulo, and with all of the heads of the various fan clubs, and it was a very different context for me. And as a moment I was talking about being present in the present moment, also because it was a particular time where there was a lot of violence in the stadiums. That's why I was invited to go and talk to them. At a certain point, someone said, you know, what you're talking about is just like playing soccer, because if you're playing and you lose your presence in the present moment, you're going to lose the ball. So if we see this, mindful recollection can be applied to so many things. It's not just in the meditative state. When we're studying, when we're reading, even if we're watching a movie, or if we're talking to someone, listening to someone speaking to us, there are many, many things that we do that if we don't have the contact with the object, and we don't keep that line open, the mind doesn't need much for it to go somewhere else. This is something that you can train in. Mindful recollection is something that we need to train in. Let's remember that our mind has a very important characteristics in all of its aspects. The more we generate a certain type of consciousness or mental state, more easily will that state of consciousness, that mind, repeat itself. When people ask me how to develop concentration, the answer is by concentrating. There are not many other possibilities. The basis of concentration is mindful recollection. How can I train in mindful recollection? With awareness, I keep the mind on an object, and when I see that the mind goes somewhere else, I bring it back and I keep that, and then gradually it becomes easier and easier, and then little by little it becomes more and more possible. I think we've all had the experience of reading a book, maybe a history book or the history of something, a novel, or any kind of book, and at a certain point it's as if someone is completely absorbed into that book, and it's almost as if there's no one around us. Time doesn't exist. There's not even aware of the pages that are turning. There's only the story. In that context, there's a very good level of mindful recollection based on the story that we're reading, experiencing. Our mind is fully there, and in spite of any noise around us or any other kind of distraction, our mindful recollection is unbothered. The three characteristics of mindful recollection, it says the mindful recollection has three qualities. The quality of the object, being acquainted with the specific object. So we need familiarity with the object. It's an object that one knows somehow. It's not something far away, or how can I say? It's not it's not fogged up. There's clarity, and it has the quality of appearance. By focusing on the object, the mind does not forget it. So not to forget it in the sense like, okay, 3 years have gone by and you remember. No, in that moment, the mind is not moving away from the object, and that connects with its function of not being distracted. When there is mindful recollection, the mind is not taken by other senses, by other objects. It is not distracted generally. It is stays on the object, and this is the qualities that we want to to develop. So talking to a friend, watching a movie, or even just wanting to enjoy something blissful, even like drinking a glass of water. If I have an object that generates bliss or strong pleasure, if while I'm experiencing it and my mind has already moved on to other things, the experience of pleasure is much weaker. Instead, if I have a feeling of pleasure and I'm able to keep my attention in this mindful recollection, I can keep it on that feeling, on the contact with the taste, and I'm able to stay there and not go elsewhere, then it's an experience of pleasure that is much greater. This is just one example of many. I think that many of you have experienced something beautiful, but with your mind somewhere else. What happens? We're not able to live it fully. So this mindful recollection is not just important, but it's something that we can train in. It's something that's possible, and it's our, just to summarize, it's our attention and being present in the present moment. So one way to train in mindful recollection is bringing the mind to where the body is. So staying with attention on our 5 external senses up to keeping our attention on our mental objects. But to have mindful recollection on a mental object, we need training first, based on a physical sensorial object, because it's harder to keep a mindful recollection, the basis of concentration, to keep it on a concept, on a thought, an emotion. It's more difficult than keeping it on an external object. So we start by training with external objects to then get to internal objects, mental objects, and mindfulness talks about this, bringing our attention to the present moment, to live that object fully, to not be distracted by other things. This has to do with mindful recollection and the vigilance, and it's the basis for concentration. And here I just take advantage to add something quickly. Many texts, even old, antique texts, that talk about how to develop a mindful recollection, a concentration, etc. They start, first of all, by saying, before putting effort to generate concentration and mindful recollection, first one needs to create favorable conditions to generate these inner states of being. First one needs to eliminate objects of distraction, because if I have a very evolved ability to mindful recollection and concentration, even if there are many objects of distraction, the mind is trained and stays on the object. But if I haven't developed these qualities yet, where there's distraction, it becomes much harder. And here, there's we can say that the more the more we're used to having external stimuli, the more need we have for these external stimuli. We actually this is something that many of us live this. I mean, our minds are made of habits. If the habit is to have constant stimulation, yesterday we talked, for example, about our senses, that they're regulated according to our senses, according to the type of object of perception. Do you remember we talked about this yesterday? Sound or even touch, sight, sound. The same thing happens with our mind. If I have many objects, constant objects of perception, of distraction, my mind it gets used to jumping from one to another. If I have very few objects, very few external stimuli, my mind gets used to more calm. But it's what happens if I'm in a room with bright light, and then I go someone very dark, or vice versa, the opposite. Does our sight adapt itself immediately, or do we need time? The same thing for our mind. If we have many objects, one thing after the other, and our mind adapts to that speed of stimuli, of reception, but then we go to very few sensory stimuli. Our mind is still in that previous speed, We need to leave it a certain amount of time without stimuli so that it changes its own speed somehow. And the opposite is true. Someone who's not used to many sensory stimuli, and then all of a sudden is bombarded with them, one is goes nuts, not able to manage the situation. But we're raised in a context now. It's been like this for a long time, where the amount of sensory stimuli is very high. Just think about the last decade. It's multiplied in tremendously. So what happens is, to be able to develop mindful recollection, one of the first things we need to do is to turn off our cell phones. Diminish the quantity of stimuli that we have, that we receive. Allow our mind to go from the moment of detox and abstinence. And I don't know if you've had that experience of where you take away the external stimuli, but then feel like you need to hear something, you need to see something, have this need of other sensory stimuli. That's a sign of addiction, of detoxing. So to develop a good level of mindful recollection and then concentration, we need to diminish our objects of distraction and the sensory stimuli that we have. Speak less, see less, touch less. Taste, for example. Our palate, can it be an interference to the development of a mindful recollection and concentration? I had an experience that showed me this. I'll just make it short. I went to eat somewhere. I went to a restaurant where I ate very well. beyond that moment of pleasure, of eating well, as soon as the dinner was over, what was my inner reaction? I want to repeat this experience. When can I come back here? And if not here, where can I find a place where we eat as well as this place? You know, and if I hadn't realized it and blocked it, I would have spent weeks thinking about it. I would have gone, you know, taking the Michelin guides. Oh, okay, here, this one's really expensive. I'll have to put money aside so I can afford that restaurant. Because that feeling takes up space, wanting to repeat it. So strong sensory stimuli, they take up a lot of space. So develop good concentration. One thing that's necessary is to diminish the stimuli, both attraction and aversion, so that we can calm the waters a little bit, so that we can concentrate on something. So advice that I give to everyone, if you think that it's important to develop mindful recollection and thus concentration, my advice is to diminish the unnecessary stimuli. Don't say what's not necessary. You don't need to come into contact with information or news that's not beneficial or necessary. Diminish the quantity of objects that we are constantly analyzing. In other words, we need to go a little bit on a diet. Take away those objects that we're constantly consuming, eating up, to create more space in our minds so that we can develop these qualities, mindful recollection and concentration, on the objects of our choice. The need to set aside time to meditate depends on how much you want to develop your concentration. Because if you want to develop a good state of concentration, or or mindful recollection to get to good concentration, then you need to train, and you need to physically set aside time for meditation so that you can repeat it again and again. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. It's not a characteristic that you can develop once there's a specific, particular meditation, something happens, and then you automatically develop concentration. It's something that needs to be done regularly. And even little by little, but with constancy. Constancy is more important than the quantity. We need to be careful that in constancy, we need to avoid the opposite. Because if I put in constancy for to develop mindful recollection, but at the same time I'm very constant in bombarding myself with other stimuli, then one annihilates the other. That's why retreats are important. A couple months, my experience is one of the first retreats that I did. At the end of the retreat, I was ready to to begin it. My feeling was as if, after 1 week after another, without stimuli, because I didn't talk to anyone, and I would read only that which was relative to the practice I was doing. I didn't watch the news. I didn't have contact with anything other than my practice. Little by little, it's as if all the different information and disturbances calmed. And after the third week, I started to, there was more, I started to be more calm and I had more room to direct my mind. So the word retreat is we are retreating from distractions to be able to direct our mind onto what we actually choose. This is the importance of this too, of retreats. But in our daily life, it is possible to train in this mindful recollection, because if I'm used to concentrating, having mindful recollection on at work, on what I do, or when I go to read something, and I try to have this state of presence afterwards when I go to sit down to meditate, that will help me. One is already quite familiar with this mental factor. Mindful recollection has a great power. It 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 keeps the mind from jumping from one thing to another, but it's something we need to train in if it's something that we want to develop. Let's go to the next one. Is this one clear? It's clear, isn't it? The next one, Tingnetzing, translated as concentration. What is concentration? It's the mental factor that is directed single-pointedly to the imputed object of perception. It has the function of being the basis for wisdom. The term wisdom here in Tibetan, Shepa, refers to the wisdom developed through special insight or profound view, Laktung, which bases itself on the concentration developed through calm abiding, Shine. That's the footnote, page 25. It is a mind that remains single-pointedly focused on the imputed object for a sustained period of time.
Quello che la stragrande maggioranza di noi chiama di concentrazione è ricordo consapevole. Ok? Quando noi diciamo sono concentrato, quella concentrazione è univoca o ci sono qualche pensiero che va un po' da una parte a un'altra? Di solito ci sono un po' di distrazioni, ok? Quello viene chiamato ricordo consapevole, che è la base per poter sviluppare la concentrazione meditativa. Ho detto anche shamatha, che la base shamatha è già un'altra cosa, la concentrazione è la base per lo sviluppo di shamatha e poi dopo di vipassana, che è quando la nostra mente rimane su un oggetto senza distrazione, senza agitazione mentale, senza andare su altri oggetti e anche senza entrare in uno stato di torpore mentale. Quando ok, wait, let me wait.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Perciò la concentrazione meditativa o la parola.
Can you repeat the definition because I was
Okay, sure.
concentrated on my silence.
No problem. Yes. Ok. Thank you. In realtà quelli che devono essere più bravi alla traduzione sono gli italiani, perché è quello che permette di parlare di una sola lingua.
Sorry, I didn't push the button. Okay, so back to Tingnetzing, called concentration.
Tingnetzing kanshena, takpe ngobola semtse chikbanites, shebeten chebelechenos. Cos'è la concentrazione?
What is concentration? It's the mental factor that is directed single-pointedly to the imputed object of perception. It has the function of being the basis for wisdom. And here, wisdom, we mean, it's called special insight. It's a specific mental state. It's a mind that remains single-pointedly focused on the imputed object for a sustained period of time. Or rather, Tingetsing is the mental factor that brings the observer to be able to stay on his own object of perception that comes through contact and stays with that attention on that object without the mind goes anywhere else. There's no mental agitation, there's no distraction, and without mental fogginess. There's clarity of the object. When that happens, at the beginning it's really tiresome. One needs to put a lot of effort in it. And at the beginning there's physical, one is it's physically difficult, and when you eliminate that physical tiredness, one develops flexibility, which we'll see later in one of the other mental factors. And then we're able to develop mental flexibility. It's no longer tiresome to remain concentrated on that designated object. And one is able to stay single-pointedly concentrated on an object without it being tiresome physically or mentally, and one has that great flexibility. One has at that point developed shine, the calm abiding, shamatha, and it's the first step to develop a vipassana in Sanskrit. Latong in Tibetan is described as a meditative state where a part of the mind stays completely concentrated on the object that is designated, chosen, and another part of the mind that is small and subtle actually analyzes that object. When that process happens, that no longer requires a gross effort and is pleasurable, that is called vipassana. And here we use the term wisdom. Here where it says it has the function of being the basis for for wisdom. What we mean, it has the function of being the basis for Latong, because it's also vipassana as special insight is the mind that maintains a single-pointed concentration and is able also to analyze. So that's why that term is used, and not just wisdom, the shepa. So to develop concentration, first of all, we need to develop mindful recollection. It's useless to put energy into concentration without first focusing on mindful recollection. That's the most important thing. What's the importance of developing meditative concentration? What function does it have? Is it so that we can relax? Also maybe, but that's not the real reason. In just a few words, the main reason why it's important to develop these states is because our mind works based on familiarization. The more we're able to develop these inner states, the more spontaneous they become. The more I'm in contact with an object, the easier it is for me to be familiar with that object, the more familiar I am with that object. Let's take an example. Let's take this book. One thing is having a general image of the book. When I see the book, naturally I develop a general image of the book. But if I see the book only once and I try to remember it, it becomes, recall it, it becomes more difficult. Instead, if I stay focused on the book for 2 hours, and then I try and then I try to remember the book, recall the book, then it becomes easier because I'm more familiar with it. If I take the book and I read it all and I go into all details and I read it 20 more times and I know every detail of the book, when I think about the book, my mental image of the book is much more detailed. But if I take that detailed image and I see it only once, then I can also I can forget it more easily. Instead, if I stay focused on that, in contact with that object time and time again, the more time I am in contact with that object, the stronger it will be. That recalling it will be stronger. So when we recall a feeling of satisfaction, or we talk, another example, the preciousness of this life, or impermanence of our own mortality, or rather the interdependence of phenomena, there are thousands of different examples. I generate a feeling of preciousness of this life. It's something that doesn't come so spontaneously. I wake up in the morning and it doesn't come spontaneously. I need to generate it. But if I'm able to generate how precious this life is, and I stay focused on that feeling without allowing my mind to go on to other things, and I stay in that state for a longer period of time, after a while it becomes much easier to regenerate that feeling. I familiarize myself much more deeply with it. If I generate the feeling, oh, this life is so precious, and then I think about other things, and I go somewhere else, and back and forth. Oh yeah, that's right. This life is precious. No, then I need a lot longer for this life to become more precious. Just for because our mind functions based on familiarity with things. Once we stay focused on something, the longer we are, the more familiar we can become. Has it ever happened that as you are studying, then you look at 5 other things, check your social media, watch the news? The effect of what we learn is much weaker compared to spending a third the amount of time just on that. So if we want to familiarize ourselves with certain states of consciousness and meditate on love, it's not about meditating on the meaning of love. That would be meditating on the concept of love, but to induce into ourselves a feeling of love and staying on that feeling of love single-pointedly, then to familiarize ourselves, then we would familiarize ourselves with love in a much stronger way. So to oppose certain conditionings that we have, we need to generate certain virtuous states of being that are very deep and for a long period of time. And this is why meditative concentration becomes very important. If we have the intention of developing certain qualities, if we have the intention to familiarize ourselves with satisfaction, awareness, respect, gratitude, inner stability, love, compassion, equanimity, altruism, wisdom, we need to develop a good level of concentration. Otherwise, we need much more time. It's like if taking an object that's in a certain position and I want to bend it. If I put strength in for a little bit of time, I'm able to do this much, but if I leave it, then it just goes back to its original position. But if I put in effort and strength little by little by little, and that object gets used to being and just staying and staying, and with more, the constancy is more important than the actual strength I'm putting into it. So we have strength, having strong having strong feelings and strong experiences. That's wonderful, but we need to familiarize ourselves more and more with these states of mind, and we do this through concentration, staying in that state of consciousness without distractions. Obviously, we're not going to open up the door to see how we develop concentration, etc., and why we should meditate, how to meditate, etc. We spend entire days on this subject. But the mental factor of concentration is what allows us to familiarize ourselves with mental states on a deeper level. Let's remember anyway that we don't have the choice to familiarize ourselves with something or not. In every moment of our lives, we are familiarizing ourselves with something. With every thought, we're shaping our mind in one way or another. Every time I get angry, I'm familiarizing myself with anger. The more I react and act in a certain way, the more I'm familiarizing myself with that way. The more I complain, the more I'm familiarizing myself with dissatisfaction. Our mind has this amazing ability to adapt itself. If I start complaining about things, our mind can become expert in seeing the negative side of things, and vice versa. It just depends on how we want to train our mind. So at the beginning, with we start with mindful recollection, and then concentration, and then getting to wisdom, that we allow ourselves to generate positive mental states of being with awareness. So I direct my mind towards that, because it doesn't come naturally, it doesn't come spontaneously, but I want it to come spontaneously. I want it to be naturally. I want to familiarize myself with that. Is that clear? With this, we're going to see quickly the next one. The fifth mental factor here is called sherab. Let's remember one thing related to concentration. What phenomenon can be an object of concentration? I mean, what can we use as a basis to develop mental meditative concentration? Anything. I mean, can we develop meditative concentration using hate as a basis? Yes. Or any other concept. I could even get to an erroneous, non-virtuous concept and keep my concentration single-pointedly focused on that. So it's not necessarily something positive. It depends on what I'm going to concentrate on. For example, there are some philosophical schools or antique religious schools that said that the objective was to develop meditative states, and they were excellent in doing this, where the object of meditation was were nihilistic thoughts, like focusing on nothing instead of the antidote of something virtuous. Now, we're not going to get into all of this, but it's in many texts. It says that we should meditate on something that is virtuous, something that can help us, because otherwise we can spend enormous amount of time concentrating on something, meditating on something that is not beneficial. So we should choose the object of meditation well, and remember that the objective of meditation is not getting into the meditative state. the objective of meditation is familiarizing oneself with a specific object of meditation. I want to say this because sometimes one can think that the objective of meditating is getting into some kind of meditative state, but it depends on what you're meditating on. Now let's go to the next one. Shut up. Discriminating awareness, also commonly translated as wisdom. What is discriminating awareness? Discriminating awareness is the mental factor that completely distinguishes the examined phenomenon. It has the function of eliminating doubt. It's an awareness that has the clarity to distinguish the qualities and the defects of a specific examined object. There are different types of wisdoms or discriminating awarenesses, such as the wisdom of listening, Tujungisherap, the wisdom of contemplation, Samjungisherap, and the wisdom of meditation, Gomjungisherap. So in this specific case, the word wisdom makes reference to the ability not just to observe an object, but to discern its characteristics with clarity. It's where we no longer have a generic idea about something, but we're able to see it to see it in a detailed way and have clarity. So discriminating awareness is often translated as wisdom. For example, wisdom, we use wisdom when we talk about the wisdom that realizes the interdependence, that sees that phenomena are interdependent, or is able to perceive the lack of inherent existence, the wisdom of emptiness, for example. But generally speaking, wisdom is this ability in this context, this wisdom, this discriminating awareness. So ignorance, which is the opposite of wisdom, literally means not seeing. Avidya in Sanskrit. Is a negation, and vid is to see. Avidya means ignorance, is the not seeing, and the opposite is wisdom, which means to see something. So here, discriminating awareness is this ability not just to have clarity on the actual object, but to observe with clarity its specific characteristics. The more we're able to observe and analyze and have clarity on an object, the more wisdom or discriminating awareness we have about that object, the more oceanic our view is. Where there is clarity lacking, the less wisdom we have. Often this wisdom comes via analysis, and after an analysis, one can get to that conclusion quickly that discriminating awareness remains, but first one goes through a correct analysis of obviously correct analysis, not just analysis. Let's give you an example. Let's look at an example. These flowers that are here on the table. These flowers appear to us, or let me just take another turn. Let's look at these flowers. Can you see these flowers? that I have here in my hand? It's clear. Now, are you able to imagine the flowers? Are you able to imagine those flowers? Yes. Are they the same flowers? Yes or no? They are, aren't they? You don't need that much to understand. I don't think that your ability that your memory is so bad that you can't remember the flowers. They're the same flowers, right? Okay. And now, are they the same flowers? And we can spend all day long doing this. These flowers, have they changed or are they the same? Without analyzing, what's your immediate reaction? They're the same. I mean, we're not able to see these micro changes that happen. If we stop to analyze the flowers, I mean, are the flowers something static or are they in constant transformation? They're in constant transformation, or rather, the flowers are impermanent. They're constantly changing. But when we see the flowers, how do they appear to us as being as if they were impermanent, or as if they were do we perceive the flowers as being in constant transformation, or do we see them as being permanent, static? Static, permanent. And this is a form of ignorance. It's the ignorance not of not seeing, but it's the ignorance of not seeing correctly. We see something impermanent as if it were something permanent. Wisdom, in this case, the discriminating awareness would be analyzing the flowers and seeing that the flowers are in constant transformation. They don't change from one moment to the next, but there are many, many inner processes. Why is the flower in constant transformation? Because it interacts, and wherever there's interaction, there will be transformation. The flower is in contact with the atmosphere. It's in contact with its own inner processes, etc., that bring the flower to change, to transform. And so I analyze and see until I get to the conclusion that the flower is impermanent. And ideally, this conclusion is at the beginning is solely conceptual. When I get to that conclusion, the flowers are impermanent. What did I do? I characterized a specific characteristic of the flower, which is a form of wisdom. It's a discriminating awareness that has to do with the impermanence of the flower that before I didn't have, that opposes to the ignorance and the grasping at the permanence of the flower, because these two things cannot coexist. Once I am convinced that the flower is impermanent, but to tell you the truth, I haven't actually had a direct experience of the impermanence of the flower. It stays as a concept, and I haven't been able to really understand this impermanence through clear logic, but I'm convinced because I was told so. And the specific reasons I don't know yet. This primary mind that perceives the impermanence of the flower, what type is it? Is it a direct valid condition? Is it an inferential valid cognition? Is it a recognizer? Is it an assumption? It's an assumption, because I say the flower is impermanent because I was told, because they have pushed me to understand, but I haven't had a direct experience myself, and I don't have a true valid reason that can hold water. When we have a correct assumption regarding the characteristics of something, like for example, the impermanence of the flower. At that point, we have developed the wisdom of listening, when instead it's the correct assumption. When I go beyond that and I continue to analyze, and I have a more detailed perception, and I'm able to see and understand that the flower is impermanent, not because someone told me and because others say so, but because I understand clearly the logic behind it. I see that the flower is a a living object, has a beginning and an end. It it arises, it ceases, is in contact with the atmosphere, and every contact, wherever there's interaction, there's transformation, etc., etc. And I get to a conclusion of my own that even if someone comes to me and says the flower is permanent, I wouldn't accept that when I am convinced that the flower is impermanent through my own my own logic. Then I've developed an inferential valid cognition, and at that point I've developed the wisdom of comprehension or contemplation, where we have a positive, when we have an inferential valid cognition, and in this specific example, the impermanence of the flower. And then once I say that the flower is impermanent, and I'm absolutely convinced in all of its aspects, at that point, if I meditate, and first I have an analytical meditation where I see the whole analysis as to why the flower is impermanent, that it's because it depends on causes and conditions, and what depends on causes and conditions is in constant transformation. There's no moment where it's not interacting. And then I get to this conclusion, and then I leave that conclusion aside. I sit down to meditate. I look at the flower, and I allow the flower to appear to me in its spontaneous way, the way it normally does. Normally, when we see the flower appears to us. Is it characteristics as being impermanent or as being permanent? It appears as if it were permanent. And at that point, I let that mind that grasps the flower as being permanent, I let it come out. Our own ignorance that sees the impermanent flowers as being permanent. And when that ignorance arises, at that point, I take that previous analysis. I say, no, it's not like this. So where the ignorance of grasping at the permanence of the flower, I bring the wisdom, the discriminating wisdom that the flower is impermanent. When I get to that conclusion, the flower is impermanent in opposition to the mind that grasps to the permanence of the flower, then I stay in that state with single-pointed meditation, concentration. And once I'm able to do that with the concept of the impermanence of the flower in opposition to the permanence of the flower, when I'm able to stay in that single pointed meditation, then I've realized the wisdom of meditation based on the impermanence of the flower. When you stay longer, gradually, that familiarization with the concept of the impermanence of the flower increases more and more, to the point that it's said that at a certain point, it's no longer a conceptual process, but through this meditative state of familiarizing ourselves with the impermanence of the flower, one has what is called a direct valid cognition of the impermanence of the flower, no longer through the mental image, but through a direct experience. And this is called the realization of impermanence. This to say the process to realize something is first correct assumption, then a correct inferential cognition, then familiarization with that inferential valid cognition to get to a direct experience that is no longer through a logical process. So one then experiences, when experiences impermanence, is no longer a conceptual process. It's a state that goes beyond words. When you have these non-conceptual experiences on something, then one afterwards can't put them into words, but it changes the life experience of that thing. Once you have the direct experience of the impermanence of flowers, then seeing flowers will never be the same. But as long as it stays conceptual, one needs to repeat that logical process. So when we talk about this, discriminating awareness, we need to analyze, see, all the specific characteristics of the object, and the more this discriminating awareness is deep, then less conceptual. Then it becomes less conceptual. Our objective is for this discriminating awareness to become completely spontaneous. One sees the flower and spontaneously one sees it as being impermanent without having to do that that logical process. That would be the wisdom of the wisdom of realizing the impermanence of the flowers. Maybe it's a little far from our own reality, but just to show you that there is a path to follow, and the wisdom of meditation, it is our objective, and we can use, we can talk about the emptiness or impermanence, etc., or even just less profound aspects we can use as a basis of our meditation to develop discriminating awareness. But Bernard Gish is saying that in modern science, one aspect gets to, when this has to do with impermanence. That one difference that is there is when you see an object and you analyze something, it depends. Is if you're analyzing it in a specific moment, like the present, it's going to have a certain characteristic. But if you analyze it in other moments, it will have different characteristics, and you'll be able to see its change. But instead of what we do is we see if our object corresponds to the mental image that we generated before, and then we say it's the same, and we're able to see change only when that object doesn't correspond to our previously generated mental image. But our point here for us is what we mean by wisdom. And normally we have this idea of developing wisdom as some kind of super mind that resolves and sees everything, when wisdom is our ability to have clarity on the object and see its characteristics, to analyze it, understand it, get to get deep. This mind that resolves everything has to do with the mind that discerns and sees the ultimate nature of something as being empty of objective, independent existence, as an antidote to the mind that grasps to an independent, autonomous existence as cause of our suffering. But generally speaking, we can talk about the wisdom of many things, and we can train in this wisdom and not stay in the obvious, but allow ourselves to not take for granted what we see, but instead to train in wisdom, we shouldn't trust appearances. We should look at things, analyze them, deepen our understanding. And once we're able to have more discriminating awareness, wisdom, then the more clarity we have about the object we're perceiving. Like a person we know, for example, the more we're able to observe the person, live more experiences together, analyze, see in many different contexts, the deeper, more detailed experience do we have about that person. And then we see that the person transforms depending on the situation as time goes by, and it becomes deeper. And the deeper our understanding, then the more we're able to examine it. So this discriminating awareness, this wisdom or discriminating awareness, is something important, and it's something that we can cultivate it. And the reason that we have these three levels of wisdom shows us clearly that we can have clarity about an object or characteristics that is a correct assumption, and then we can get to having an inferential cognition and then our own experience. These are the three types of wisdoms that are possible. So we have the wisdom of listening, which is correct assumption, then the wisdom of comprehension based on an inferential valid cognition based on the characteristics of the phenomenon, and then the wisdom of a direct valid cognition based on meditation. But in our daily life, there's an enormous difference. There's a difference between conceptually analyzing something and then having that direct experience with that thing. It's completely different. Maybe someone who analyzes a lot can describe it with many beautiful words, but he who has had a direct experience has a level of understanding that is much deeper. It may be not able to even to verbalize that experience, because direct experiences cannot be translated into words, actually. It's like saying someone who becomes expert in chocolate but who's never tasted chocolate can talk about all the characteristics of chocolate, the chemical compounds in chocolate, how many types of chocolate, the history of chocolate, the benefits of chocolate, can describe the taste of chocolate, what he's been told, what he's read, but he doesn't really know what chocolate is. And then we can take someone who has no idea about any of that, but someone who's eaten it many, many times. So who knows chocolate better? The one who ate, who's eaten it. The other one can know the story of chocolate well, but not actually chocolate. So ideally, I mean, and this shows you that this would be the difference between a direct experience and a correct assumption, where we go to learn something about something through hearing. So it's important to not take for granted appearances, but instead to analyze, so this discriminating awareness or discriminating wisdom is what this is. So to conclude, so the five, the five object ascertaining or object determining mental factors determine the strength of a thought, our ability to grasp the object. They are aspiration, what takes us towards, the aspiration is our desire, our firm apprehension, that allows the mind to hold on to our object, our mindful recollection that helps us to not forget the object, and then we have concentration, and then discriminating awareness. So first we have, and we need actually clarity about something to then be able to concentrating instead before we can concentrate on it. So these are the five object ascertaining mental factors called Yongzing in Tibetan, and let's remember that these are all mental factors that can be cultivated, that we can train in. Now we'll stop for lunch, okay?
Losan tempe drume sasumgi drove munsela tato ne gyure che kewa kundu yanda lama dang dralme cheki pela longche chin sadan lamge yente rabzo ne dorje change kopa nyur toba sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan dele kshin Kuncho sumke jingi lo, kuncho sumke ngodrubo tsol, kuncho sumke tashi sho.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Oma huntemba lame sangye rinpoche, kyoba lame tamche rinpoche, dremba lame gendo rinpoche. Chiamne kuncho sumla chepa. Buon appetito. Grazie a tutti.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good lunch.